If you guys didn't know, I have a serious medical condition called revisiting Monster Hunter every once in a while. It's one of the few series that I will never grow tired of, and here we are on my grind again. Monster Hunter, over the course of its lifespan, has experimented with multiple combat mechanics to make the gameplay loop more interesting. Monster Hunter 4 introduced mounting, which has become a staple of the series since then, with minor changes here and there. In Monster Hunter 4, you were blocked from the party if you attacked the monster while someone was mounted. Just sit back and let the rider do his thing, basically. In Generations, you could actually help topple the monster by attacking them. Now in World, I actually have no idea really. Some people attack, others don't. It's more of a read the room situation unless they speak a different language. In Rise, it was replaced with wyvern riding. I don't really like that one, but what's my opinion worth here? Monster Hunter Generations introduced weapon arts and weapon styles, which, if you ask me, I seriously need to come back. It added so much style to the hunter's moveset and more variation with each weapon. I wake up in a cold sweat sometimes, dreaming about Valor style never returning. Then Monster Hunter World had the Clutch Claw, not many people liked that one, kinda on the fence myself. Monster Hunter Rise had the wire bugs, and here we are, with Monster Hunter Wilds nearly here having its own set of new mechanics. However, the one generation of Monster Hunter games introduced perhaps the most divisive gameplay experiment the series had seen thus far. The third generation overall was a very bold title. See, the average amount of large monsters each game had was absurd. Iceborne had a total of 71 monsters, 4 Ultimate 75, Sunbreak 78, Gen Ultimate a staggering 93, and then there's Frontier Z. You wanna guess how many the third generation had? Monster Hunter 3 Tri had a total of, brace yourself, 18 monsters. Now for a standalone game, 18 boss fights is a rather high number, but when compared to the rest of the series, this is kinda pathetic. I will admit, I am comparing the ultimate versions of other games to the base game that is 3 Tri. When 3 Ultimate was released, it had a more reasonable number of 51 large monsters. But even then, the base game from other installments were still far from the teen numbers. The reason for this disturbance of low monsters is because besides Rathalos, Raytheon, and Diablos, the other 15 were completely new to the series. It was a vastly different game that decided to start from the ground up, not only with its monsters, but its areas as well. Monster Hunter 3 Tri had 10 brand new areas never seen before and featured 0 returning locales. It really was the odd duck of the family when looking back, but that's what I loved about it so much. It had such a unique atmosphere to it that the other games don't really capture. The overall aesthetic Tri had is easily my favorite in the series. Moga Village is my favorite village in the series. Now, am I being biased because this was my first game in the series? Yeah, however, the reason we're taking a pit stop in the third generation is because of one unique combat mechanic. The third generation introduced a healthy variety of aquatic creatures. And what do aquatic creatures do? They swim. Therefore, we had to swim. Back in the day, the mechanics were quite limited. There was no mounting. If you forgot to eat, you had to restart the quest or waste a max potion. Armor sets back then had skills with drawbacks that you had to use a decorative slot just to nullify them. Like, it was a whole mess, but it was a mess that I enjoyed. Underwater combat was one of those quote-unquote stains that I thought was fine. Many players, however, did not find fighting monsters underwater enjoyable, and for good reasons too. There are some valid criticisms as to why this mechanic has never returned in the series. Let's begin with one of the biggest critiques. Now, mobility wasn't exactly the strong suit in the series, okay? You could run, and that's about it. Especially with your weapon drawn, you're kinda caught with your pants down most of the time. Still, fighting on land was a fair and decent challenge. Not underwater though. Monsters always had higher mobility, but in the water, it was especially clear how much of a sitting duck you were. In most media, the depiction of movement underwater was always depicted dramatically slow. In Monster Hunter 3, it's really no different. Your recovery was slower, your so-called sprint was slower. The aquatic monsters did not lose any speed when in the water. They actually had increased speed in the water due to being in their natural habitat. The classic charges that every single underwater monster had got me most of the time, and if it didn't hit, the wind pressure did. Yeah, the wind pressure under the water, I know, it doesn't make sense, but it was in the game. It was actually worse because some monsters like Abyssal Lagiacrus could easily combo you by charging one way, and by the time you recovered, he would swing back around for the kill. See, underwater, you didn't have the infamous Superman dive, a dive that provided insane iframes to dodge any attack. You couldn't do that, so if a monster was doing a combo, all you could do was take it like a good boy and leave an emotional review on Reddit. The regular dodge in Monster Hunter was never meant to be used like in Elden Ring, where you have iframes to dodge hitboxes. Rather, it was all about spacing or getting just out of range to avoid the attack encounter. Underwater, you couldn't really do that effectively because unlike on land, you now have a 360 free camera to utilize. Yeah, you had more room to dodge, but the problem was the monsters also had more freedom on where to attack. They could come from above, below, behind, and the front, even at a weird angle that's hard to calculate, which doesn't pair well with the hunter's mobility as previously stated. So, your mobility was bad. Not exactly a small problem, but what else did underwater combat struggle with? The camera was, I'm just gonna be honest with you guys, was my least favorite part about underwater fights. Listen, I don't like gang fights, but apparently I was fighting the monster and the camera for the entire hunt. I briefly mentioned that underwater you have a 360 free camera, which sounds good on paper. In practice, it was wonky to say the least. I've never been drunk, I don't really plan on it either, but if I ever wanted to experience being drunk, a drunk simulator, I'll just play 3 Ultimate again. It was disorienting to say the least, at least when compared to on-land combat. You had the lock-on feature in 3U, which helped a lot, but in Tri, it was a nightmare. What absolutely hurt was the depth perception. I cannot tell you how many times I was so confident in one of my attacks landing only for it to miss immediately afterwards. This made a hunt incredibly frustrating for reasons that are artificial because there's really nothing you can do about the camera. Sometimes you'll be near the surface too, and the camera will appear above the water, making it hard to see what's happening. And if you want to talk about hard to see, the flooded forest was as murky as can be. 100% added to the atmosphere of the map, and I loved that, but the practicality of eyesight was definitely a struggle, alright? Not that we couldn't see the monsters, it was more so you had to focus intently to understand what's going on, if that makes sense. So there's mobility, and then there's the camera. To add on to this, underwater combat did not favor some of the weapons. I was a switch axe and longsword user back then, and in the water it was okay. However, some weapons like the hammer or even the greatsword were at a severe disadvantage. It wasn't that they were slower, but think of their movesets and the problems we already discussed. Hammers lost to depth perception. The ground pound was a good tool to use, however, try landing any other attack. You can hit the kelp, but you can't hit the 30-foot electric crocodile. Great swords already were sluggish on land, but how much more difficult do you think it was to fight underwater? With monsters' increased mobility, getting a fully charged slash was near impossible. During my time of playing these games, I switched to dual blades solely for the purpose of underwater battles. It was good in the sense that I tried out a new weapon, but bad that I was kind of forced to use it due to the nature of underwater combat, and I really couldn't use any other weapons I wanted to. The fact that your favorite weapon would possibly be disadvantageous against all underwater battles was a real issue in these games. It made it artificially unfair, and even with the better weapons, mobility and the camera were still prominent issues. I didn't even mention maintaining your oxygen levels because it doesn't really matter, it's just kind of a thing that's there. You know, as we take a look at the scoreboard here, underwater combat isn't looking too great. Again, these are big and reasonable issues that I can't disagree with. Even with all the problems this mechanic has though, I still love it. But why exactly? Am I blinded by nostalgia? Clinging onto the hope of this mechanic returning with modern technology? Or am I clinically insane? I think it's a combination of nostalgia and the depth this mechanic adds to both the monsters and the environments. Let's talk about Ceadeus for a moment. Ceadeus is the final boss within the story mode of Monster Hunter 3, and there is something majestic about this Elder Dragon. He stands out from so many other monsters in this category, and I think it's because of his predominantly aquatic features. The full fight is underwater, and it's a good one too. Granted, the chase inside the ruins is near torture, I will admit that, but if you chop off the beard beforehand, he'll race to the final skirmish. Also, Goldbeard Ceadeus starts in the arena, so the developers knew you didn't want to go through that again. From his sheer size to his graceful movements, this fight would not be nearly as impressive if he was fought on land. Ceadeus has this dual nature to him. Throughout the story, he is the cause of the earthquakes that threaten the destruction of Moga Village. However, when you encounter him, Ceadeus is really a passive giant, only fighting you when provoked. The only reason he's causing so much damage to Moga Village is because of his natural instinctive behaviors. It's kinda sad that we're forced to put this creature down, because really he's just kinda living his life. When you're fighting him, Ceadeus moves with slow but powerful motions, even swimming around the arena at times to get a precise angle on the hunter. The light pouring in from above, the bioluminescent lights from below the darkness, it evokes this ethereal, otherworldly yet ominous atmosphere. It's something that you simply can't replicate with a land battle. It's an entirely different experience. Other locales have their own special feel to them as well when under the water. The Flooded Forest is a personal favorite. As I previously mentioned, it is very murky and dark underneath the water. It's hard to see the monsters sometimes, but it brings out certain features such as their eyes or lanterns. It's crowded with vegetation and mud that perfectly replicates the atmosphere of the Flooded Forest. There is a literal and figurative depth to the creatures and their environments when underwater combat is possible. Once you submerge yourself beneath the waves, it is an entirely new, alienated experience. The slower movements don't help during combat, sure, but the exploration and immersion is superb. Seeing the monsters move effortlessly in the water magnifies their scale and power. The fact that you can fight monsters like Legiacris or Plesioth on both land and water adds so much realism to it, because that's how a lot of animals normally behave. Instead of bending to the will of an easier combat experience, we're forced to fight at a disadvantage to stay true to the nature of these monsters. The sound design is another great factor too. The hunters and monsters all sound muffled or distorted in a way. See, visuals alone can create a good sense of immersion, but when you pair that with different audio, it sells to the player that this is a new environment altogether. If you want the thesis statement, what I'm really saying here is these games at the time were limited mechanically speaking. The controls were already clunky, so adding underwater combat was a bit too ambitious, I would say. However, the immersion, visuals, and depicted realism of the monsters is what made these fights stand out from my early experiences in the Monster Hunter series. I would love to see underwater mechanics come back, because now I think we could have some solid gameplay and even better immersion if done correctly. I don't think Wilds is gonna have any. I mean, one of the Apex monsters, I can't remember its name, it's like Ulthduna. He's like a primarily water monster, but we don't see any underwater gameplay, so I don't think it's going to be in there. Hopefully in the next generation of Monster Hunter games, but regardless, this is just simply my thoughts on the subject matter. I would love to hear your thoughts on this topic, and of course, if you guys did enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like and to subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care everyone, and of course, stay safe.